Hello and welcome. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran and you're watching a special broadcast here on DD India. I have with me a very special guest, Mr. Andrey Klimov. Mr. Klimov is a Russian lawmaker since 1999. He is also the deputy leader of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Upper House of the Federal Russian Legislature and also the deputy secretary of the General Council on International Affairs of the United Russia Party. Mr. Klimov, welcome and thank you for your time.
Thank you for your attention.
Appreciate it. Mr. Klimov, let's start with your ongoing visit to India. Could you take us through your meetings here in New Delhi? Who all have you met and how do those discussions go?
This visit is very short indeed, and the main task was to have as much contacts as possible, as many contacts as possible here in Delhi, and especially with the ruling party of your country, because in our past we already established affairs with some other political parties. But unfortunately, by different reasons, we hadn't good opportunities to have direct contacts with the ruling party, with Janata Party, and now we already, after these meetings, can say that we are on the right way, and I do believe that within this 2020 we shall have a lot of very important and hopefully useful meetings with my colleagues in this international department of the ruling party, with the general secretaries and some other colleagues who are responsible for foreign affairs of your party, of DGP.
Indeed. Mr. Klimov, you're the deputy leader of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the Upper House of the Russian Federal Legislature. In that context, could you help our viewers understand the discussion that might take place in the committee on affairs related to India in particular?
Well, to be honest, of course, we cannot concentrate our attention just for 2 or 3 different directions of the Russian foreign policy, because we have over 30 neighbor states of our country, 30. Right. It's something. We are a champion among all other countries of the world. And that is why, first of all, we have to concentrate our attention to affairs with our neighbors. And we have very different neighbors. For example, we are neighbors with the United States of America. Russia is very close to America. You have to remember that between our Far East and Alaska, it is less than 5 kilometers only. And you can go by bike, if you like, from Vladivostok to the Northern Korea. It is also important. We also have among our neighbors countries like Iran and Finland, very different countries. But nevertheless, our affairs with India is also very important, with very deep roots. And we call it strategic partnership, as you know.
Right.
Certainly, our committee tried to pay much more attention to affairs among BRICS countries. And we already established a very special subcommittee, the only subcommittee among all BRICS countries. I am chair of this subcommittee. And this is a subcommittee on affairs with BRICS countries, between Russia Federation and BRICS countries. So now I'm also responsible for some things during our presidency in BRICS, and we are ready to arrange a very special parliamentary dimension of BRICS affairs. And certainly, as a doctor of economics, I try to pay my personal attention to a new development bank of BRICS, which is under a management of a chairperson from India. We know each other, so it's also interesting side of the story. And certainly we have to pay as much attention as possible for some very specific directions like Ukraine, the United States, the European Union, Japan, China, and of course India.
Absolutely. So let's talk a bit about Russia-India ties, Mr. Klimov. 2020 is a special year. India and Russia are celebrating the 20th anniversary of their strategic partnership, the first by India with any other country. And we remember President Putin visiting India 20 years ago and since then the relationship has grown by leaps and bounds. In that context, in 2020, how would you describe India-Russia ties as they exist today, and what might be the way forward in the bilateral sphere?
Of course, I am speaking about my personal opinion.
Sure.
And as an expert, I can say that from political side of this story, our affairs, maybe I can name it perfect. That's a truly story. If we are speaking about relationship of our societies,
Right.
we are also on the way. But if we come back to the economical ties to some projects, we have, of course, achievements, but we have also potential. For example, you have to be aware that from one hand, having such kind of strategic partnership, the trade turnover between India and Russia is less than our trade over with America. And you know that American government and American parliament officially in their public law named my country as adversary. Nevertheless, our trade turnover is higher than with India, our strategic partner. So we have to do a lot on this way, and potential is great indeed. But I believe that our leaders, they not just ready to do that, they're eager to do that, which is also very important.
And talking about the specific areas in the bilateral ties, Mr. Klimov, there are political issues, economic issues, as you flagged. Defense and security is another key pillar of the bilateral relationship. And then we have space, energy cooperation, including nuclear, civil nuclear energy, and the related aspects. And there are regional and global issues as well. So on balance, when you look at the evolution of the bilateral ties, are there any areas of specific concern that might, you might be discussing in your committee, for instance?
We already discussed a lot of things, and if we are speaking with perspectives, real perspectives, I can name nuclear research activities and nuclear technologies. Then, of course, cooperation in space, certainly cooperation in defense industry. Then, as a perspective, I can name this initiative to do something together, a lot of things in Russian Arctic zone and Russian Far East. Mostly we are speaking about oil and gas deposits. Right. And certainly we'd like to have mostly friends there among our partners, because it is very sensitive part of our economical life, and to open the door to this very promising area, we have to know to whom we do that. And in your case, in case of India, we are looking for really friendship and the spirit of friendship in these fields. Of course, we are speaking about very profitable things from one hand, but from the other hand, we are speaking about friendship spirit.
Indeed. Since you mentioned the Arctic and Russia's Far East, we saw Prime Minister Narendra Modi travel to Vladivostok last year, and since then there's been talk about Indian investments in the Russian Far East and also cooperation in the Arctic area. So would you have any update for our viewers on those two issues, the Arctic cooperation as well as Indian investments in the Russian Far East?
Well, Mr. Trutnev, who is Vice Prime Minister of my country and Special Envoy of Mr. President of Mr. Putin in our Far East, I know him at least 35 years. And I can tell you that he is a very active gentleman. And after his visit, he prepared a big program, a large program for cooperation. And certainly this is a two-side story. It's not possible to do that only from the Russian side. But when I mentioned that perspectives, of course, I thought about possibility of Indian investments. To be honest, it is not so difficult to find investors to this zone. But as I already said, this is not only about money. This is about strategic partners and friends. And in case of India, we are speaking not about just investments, pure investments, but we are speaking about friends and friendship.
Indeed. Mr. Klimov, let's focus a bit on the other issue of pressing concern to many countries around the world, including India, and that's counter-terrorism and security cooperation, including between India and Russia. How do you see the current global mood on counter-terrorism, and is there scope for improvement?
Terrorism is really a disaster of our time. Of course, we know, gently speaking, that terrorism is not just the result of today's life. But today we have this internet space, and we have another transportation system, global transportation system. And we have also achievements in biological, chemical science.
Right.
It means that the possibility for people who would like to make a crime, for terrorists, much broader than it was, let's say, even 20, 25 years ago. And if we look at, for example, problem with this coronavirus, we can see what may happen if people be ready to implement such kind of weapons against civil society, and it could happen anywhere. It's not so easy to do. So we have to unite our powers, our knowledges. Our cooperation must be really very deep and broad to cover all these challenges. And I do believe that in case of our bilateral affairs, we can find all necessary answers. We also have such kind of cooperation with some other countries, of course. But now, because of political reasons, people from the West, they, unfortunately for us, unfortunately for global goals, and for them as well, they blocked some kind and somehow these possibilities, these bridges where we can have much more achievements in battling and struggling with terrorism.
Mr. Klimov, let me expand our discussion to cover some regional issues. Iran, for instance. Are you at all concerned about the current state of play regarding Iran in the world, given the US sanctions on Iran and the scrapping of the Iran nuclear deal and the tensions rising in the Gulf as we speak after the killing of General Qasem Soleimani? How concerned would you be as a Russian lawmaker and the Deputy Secretary of the Foreign Affairs Committee or the upper house of the Russian Legislature in particular on tensions in the Gulf?
Well, if we look at that problem, we can see that this is a kind of chain of problems. One maybe smaller than that. This one is big enough. But unfortunately, people in Washington, when they produce some kind of political decisions, they usually, unfortunately for all of us, they usually think about themselves and political reasons of their internal political life. And a lot of countries may be among potential victims of their political cooperation inside the United States of America. And this is a disaster. And for a lot of people, a lot of politicians in Washington, something which happened not in America is like a computer game. It's, for them it's something which is not exist in the material, as it seems to them. If something happened in America, it's one thing. If something happened somewhere 5,000-7,000 kilometers, miles from their houses, it's nothing. It's just like a movie. But we are speaking about not movie, but about potential war, the Third World War.
Third World War in the Gulf? Because of
Third
the
World War
in
in the Gulf. And it could happen. unfortunately. Of course, we are speaking about academical situation, but who knows what could be after the first steps. And certainly, if one state kill politicians, officials in another state openly and proud of that, it is something new. It is something new. And this is not for the first time in behavior of our partners from the United States. Well, of course we have to react, but we must do that in a political way, not in a military way. And position of my country, of Moscow, is very, very clear. We must have solutions by efforts of our diplomats, by efforts of our political leaders, and that is why Mr. Putin proposed to all 5 members of the Security Council, main members, keynote members, to arrange a meeting and to discuss all that things together as a system of problems.
Right.
Because I just mentioned a chain. We are speaking about chain. We cannot say this element is very important, this is not. No, this is about a chain. And if we could have that meeting, maybe we can find a kind of general solution. It is a long way, it's a hard road, but we have to do that.
Mr. Klimov, you mentioned how, in the beginning, how Russia has 30 neighbors, including Iran and the US. So now that we've discussed about Iran, I want to focus attention to the US. Now, the
Also
US...
our neighbor.
Also your neighbor, indeed. How would you describe President Trump's policies towards Russia in particular? There was an allegation that Russia meddled in the US elections before the 2016 election in the US. And now there are reports that Russia is supporting Bernie Sanders against Trump. So how would you react to allegations of Russian meddling in the US domestic politics?
My personal position, better not to react at all. Because this is American rumors for Americans, and that's it.
So these are only rumors. There's no substance to those allegations?
It is very specific kind of rumors. For example, I know well Christopher Steele. He was a diplomat in Moscow, but at the same time he was officer of MI6, and we know that for sure. Now he is chair of one private intelligence company, and he received a very specific proposal from side of Obama and his friends and colleagues to prepare Trump's dossier. And he did it, and they pay him money, and we know how much. And everything started from that. It was a jolly good idea indeed of part of American establishment, Democrats, and some people in the Republican Party who were against Mr. Trump. And they tried to build that story based on nothing, on these fictions. So, to be honest, they were successful with that story. And with the help of that story, they attacked Trump from different directions. But again, if we are speaking about Trump or Obama, both, or somebody else, or Clinton or whatever, they are American politicians, American, and they are looking for American interests. And they do everything for America, but they have different visions of American future. That is the problem, but this is the problem of Americans, not of Russians. So we are ready to have affairs with any leaders of any country of the globe, and that's it.
So Russia is prepared, are you suggesting therefore that Russia is prepared to deal with anybody in the White House come November later this year?
Of course.
Either Trump or Bernie Sanders or whoever.
This is a very important point of our today's political life of my country. If you compare behavior of this country, of the Russian Federation and the Soviet Union, you can see very principle different. We have two main goals of the Russian foreign policy. One, protection of our sovereignty. on the territory of the Russian Federation. The second one is to prepare conditions for better life of my citizens of the Russian Federation. That's it. In the Soviet times, the main goal was establishing communism all over the world. You see the difference. And we do not want to change political systems somewhere. We have no reason to do that. And we have no time to do that. And it is really useless, indeed. We have too many problems we have to solve inside the country with our neighbors, but it is not a reason to change regimes or political systems or constitutions or leaders anywhere. That's it.
Mr. Klimov, you said that Russia has too many domestic issues to contend with. So in that context, how would you describe the current debate in Russia as we speak on reforming the constitution and to usher in a more open Russian society and political life of leaders going forward? Is President Putin, for instance, a president for life? Is that that's how many people around the world see him as? So is he going to be around for the foreseeable future as the de facto leader of Russia?
I am not speaker of Mr. Putin, of course, and I can say that as a lawmaker, we discuss such problems from the beginning. I mean, I appeared in the State Duma in 1999, and at that time we already discussed things, how to rebuild our constitution or how to make some amendments to the constitution, and we already done something within this 20 years period. But now it is high time to have a kind of modernization of some parts of constitution.
Like for instance?
Like for instance, we have already have some laws. For example, for Russian president, prime minister, all our prosecutors and people like that, members of parliament, it is prohibited to have citizenship of any other states. So we have this law, but this is the law. It is not a part of our constitution. So we have to implement that points. Honestly, quotation from existing law to constitution to protect it, maybe not forever, but for understandable period. Then we already have some achievements in our social and economic life. So now we have fixed that in constitution to give right directions for all governments after us. Then we have to do something with some rights of our parliament. And we try to increase some rights. And this is really the way of democracy, of real democracy. Coming back to situation with presidential posts, we exclude any possibility for anybody else to be in this post more than 2 terms, and that's it. So we fixed that in our constitution, and if you look at American history, you know that before Roosevelt, it was possible. But after Roosevelt, after his 3rd term, one by one, not like in Putin case, with an interval, they decided to change a little bit their rules. We already on the same direction.
So will there be an interval again for President Putin? Is that what is on the agenda, on the anvil?
Well, President Putin being elected by people according to the existing constitution with a big interval. He was prime minister for 4 years, and to be honest, he was so popular after the 2nd term in Kremlin that theoretically, not he practically could ask our party, members of parliament, to make such changes in the constitution in 2008. But he preferred to follow this constitution. So we are speaking about future possibilities for some other leaders. But who will be then? It is in hands of our people, not in hands of some of politicians, but in hands of people. And Mr. Putin, he is still leader of our nation. He is, if you like, father of my political party. He is not a member of party because he's president, but he was chairperson of the party before his last presidential elections. It means that we have normal political life. We have exactly 60 political parties. We have 4 parties in parliament, not like in America, just 2. So we have some other things. We have 85 constituent entities, 85 republics and regions in our federation with their own parliaments, regional parliaments, own constitutions, own charters, own budgets, own legislation. So it's a very complicated system. And modernization of the system, it is the way how to go through new challenges.
So does this reform measure mean, in a sense, that there won't be a repeat of what we saw before in Russia, where President Putin and Prime Minister Medvedev alternated, like
this is
working
not
in
about
tandem?
Putin or Medvedev. Again, that's not rumors, but it's handmade fictions about my country. I just mentioned that we started to discuss that things 20 years ago. But for that kind of changes, we need political stability.
So may I rephrase my question then? My final question to you would be, has Russian democracy, in your estimation, matured enough to see another leader emerge from within Russian politics?
This is not about democracy, first of all, because if we are speaking about concrete person, we are speaking about attitude to this person of millions and millions of people. But it is not necessary for this person to be just president and that's it. We know historical examples even in India when it is not necessary to be president of country but to be leader of the country, correct? So in our case we are speaking about more or less same things. Mr. Putin, he has now enormous support, a number of supporters. But of course we have opposition, but of course we have political debates, but of course we have internal competition, political competition. And this constitution reform, if you call it in such a way, this is not about Mr. Putin. This is about development of my country. I cannot say that our democracy is perfect, but I cannot say that American democracy is perfect as well. We have direct elections of the president, not like in America, for example. And certainly, I don't want to criticize political system of America, of the United Kingdom, of some European countries, or India, for example, or China. We have our own political system, and we have to improve it. That's it.
All right, on that note, Mr. Klimov, thank you so much for talking to DD India. Appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your attention.
And that's a wrap on this special broadcast. But news continues here on DD India. You can catch all the latest updates on our social media, mobile and digital platforms. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.